This tutorial is for 4th grade, Module 5, Lesson 28. In this lesson, we're going to plot fractions on a line plot and use that information to answer some word problems. The chart shows the distance in miles that 4th graders in Miss Smith's class were able to run before stopping for a rest. We're to create a line plot to display the data in the table. So we have our table showing the students and the distance each student ran before stopping. We also have a number line that has been divided into eighths, and here's where we'll plot this information. So I'm just going to take each student one at a time and show where their distance falls on the line plot. So Joe ran 2 4/8 miles. So I'm going to find 2 4/8 on the number line. So I'm at 2, and then I just move over 4 points, and I'm going to put an X above 2 4/8 to show Joe's distance. I'm going to check that off so I know I've done that. Now I'm going to move on to Ariana. She ran 1 6/8. So I'll start at the 1, and I'll count over 6/8, and I'll put an X where Ariana's distance is. So I'm going to continue to do that for each of the students. So here's my finished line plot. You'll notice that in the cases where students ran the same distance, those X's were stacked on top of each other. So you can clearly see where some of the students ran the same distance. Now let's move on to the word problems. The first question asks, who ran a mile farther than Jenny? So if I find Jenny's distance in the chart, Jenny ran 5/8 of a mile. Well, 1 mile farther than that would be 1 5/8. And I can look and see that that would be Morgan. Morgan ran 1 5/8 miles, and that's 1 mile farther than Jenny. And then who ran a mile less than Jack? Well, Jack's at 2 5/8 of a mile. If I take one of those miles away, that also equals 1 5/8. And again, that would be Morgan. So Morgan ran 1 mile farther than Jenny and 1 mile less than Jack. The next question says 2 students ran exactly 2 2/8 miles. We're to identify the students. So if I look for 2 2/8, I see that we have Sasha at 2 2/8 and Anson. So they both ran 2 2/8 miles. Now the second part of the question says how many 1/8 miles did each of these students run? So I have to think how many 1/8 are in 2 2/8. So 2 2/8 is the same as, let's turn our whole number into eighths. If it takes 8 to make a whole and I have 2, that would be 16/8. And then I'll add in the other 2/8, and that would be a total of 18/8. So Sasha and Anson ran 18/8 miles each. The next question says, what is the difference in miles between the longest and shortest distance run? Well, I can look at my line plot and find this is my shortest distance, and that was 5/8. And then my longest distance was 2 5/8. To find the difference, I just need to subtract those. So 2 5/8 minus 5/8 would be equal to 2. So the difference between the longest and the shortest distances run would be 2 miles. The next question says, compare the distances run by Ariana and Morgan using greater than, less than, or equal to. So we'll find Ariana's distance, that's 1 6/8 miles, and then Morgan's distance is 1 5/8 miles. Well, they each ran 1 full mile, but since Ariana ran 6/8 compared to Morgan's 5/8, Ariana ran farther than Morgan, so 1 6/8 is greater than 1 5/8. The next question says Miss Smith ran twice as far as Jenny. How far did Miss Smith run? And we're to write that distance as a mixed number. Well, first we need to find Jenny's distance, and that would be 5/8 of a mile. So we're going to take 2 times 5/8. Well, if I have 2 copies of 5/8, that would be 10/8 of a mile. Now I need to show this as a mixed number. If it takes 8 to make a whole and I have 10, I can make one whole and I would have 2/8 left over. So the distance is 1 2/8 miles. And finally, this question says Mr. Reynolds ran 1 3/8 miles. We're going to use greater than, less than, or equal to compare the distance Mr. Reynolds ran to the distance that Miss Smith ran. So Mr. Reynolds ran 1 3/8 miles, and we just determined that Miss Smith ran 1 2/8 miles. Well, they both ran 1 complete mile. Mr. Reynolds ran 3/8 of a mile extra, and Miss Smith ran 2/8. So Mr. Reynolds ran further than Miss Smith. So now you see how we can use a line plot and a chart to answer these types of word problems.